I should have known. The signs had been there all along, small, almost imperceptible shifts in her behavior. The sudden obsession with her phone, the late nights grading papers, the barely hidden smirks when she thought I wasn't looking. But I had ignored them. Maybe because I didn't want to believe them. Maybe because I was a fool. But the truth has a way of crawling out from the shadows, no matter how deeply it's buried. It started on a Sunday morning, the kind of morning that should have been peaceful. I woke up to the sound of birds outside our bedroom window, the golden glow of the early sun filtering through the curtains. The scent of coffee drifted in from the kitchen, a habit my wife, Claire, had picked up over the years. She always brewed coffee first thing in the morning, even before she fully woke up. It was one of those small things I loved about her. Or at least, I used to. I stretched, letting out a breath, and reached over to her side of the bed. It was empty. Still warm, but empty. Not unusual. Claire had a habit of waking up before me on weekends, making breakfast, reading through emails from her students. She was dedicated to her job, too dedicated, sometimes. That was one of the things that made her such a great teacher. At least, that's what I had always believed. I sat up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes, and reached for my phone. That was when I saw it. A single notification. A message from an unknown number. Your wife is sleeping with her student. The words didn't register at first. They seemed too ridiculous, too absurd. A joke. A cruel prank. My mind immediately went to the idea of some random internet scam, some troll trying to stir up trouble. But then I reread the message, and something about it felt different. It wasn't vague. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't asking for money or trying to lure me into clicking a link. It was just a statement. Cold. Direct. Unapologetic. And the worst part? A small, nagging part of me believed it. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe evenly. No. This was ridiculous. Claire would never, she wouldn't. But doubts started creeping in, unwelcome but persistent. The late nights. The sudden secrecy with her phone. The way she had stopped touching me the same way she used to. I clenched my jaw, my heartbeat suddenly too loud in my ears. No. I wasn't going to entertain this. I trusted my wife. We had been together for almost 10 years. I wasn't about to let some anonymous message shake the foundation of our marriage. And yet, as I stood up and made my way to the kitchen, I found myself watching her more closely than I ever had before. Claire was standing by the counter, her back to me, dressed in an oversized sweater, her hair slightly messy from sleep. She had her phone in her hand, thumb moving quickly over the screen, typing something. I watched as she paused, then quickly turned the phone face down on the counter, as if she didn't want me to see. A strange, cold sensation settled in my stomach. "Morning," I said, my voice neutral. She turned, a small, distracted smile on her lips. "Morning. Coffee's ready if you want some." I nodded, stepping closer. "Who were you texting?" Her smile faltered for the briefest second, so quick that if I hadn't been watching her carefully, I might have missed it. But I saw it. She recovered quickly. "Just some students asking about an assignment." Her voice was casual, but something about it felt forced. Staged. I tried to push the thought away. She's a teacher. Of course her students text her. But then I remembered she had told me just last week that she never gave out her personal number to students. She always used email or the school's messaging system. I didn't say anything. Just nodded, poured myself some coffee, and sat down at the table. But my mind was racing. That message. The way she had turned her phone over. The hesitation before answering my question. I needed answers. And I knew exactly where to start. Claire had always been careless with technology. She never bothered logging out of anything. She wasn't paranoid about passwords or security, after all, we were married. She had nothing to hide. Or so I had thought. I waited until she went upstairs to shower before I made my move. Her laptop was sitting on the counter, open but in sleep mode. I tapped the spacebar, watching as the screen flickered to life. No password. She trusted me completely. The irony made me want to laugh. I clicked open her messages. My hands trembled as I scrolled through her recent conversations, searching for anything that would prove my suspicions wrong. Instead, I found something that shattered my world. A thread with no name, just a number. I clicked it open. And then, there it was. A flood of messages. Miss Bennett, you drive me crazy in class. Shoo, don't call me that when we're alone. I can't stop thinking about last night. My stomach twisted violently. I forced myself to keep reading. Messages about meeting up after school. Plans to sneak around. Inside jokes I didn't understand. And then the pictures. A selfie of them in her car. A blurry shot of him in our house, standing in front of the mirror in our bathroom. Our bathroom. The bile rose in my throat. This was real. There was no misunderstanding, no innocent explanation. Claire, my wife, was having an affair. With a student. The betrayal burned like acid, corroding every memory I had of us, of her. My hands curled into fists. I had never felt rage like this before. It wasn't the kind of anger that came in sudden bursts, it was slow, controlled, suffocating. And suddenly, I knew what I had to do. I had to confront her. I didn't move from the chair. My hands rested on the sides of the laptop, fingers pressing into the cold metal. My eyes stayed locked on the messages, reading them over and over, as if doing so would somehow change their meaning. The longer I stared, the heavier the weight in my chest became. Claire had done this. She had done this in our home. She had brought him here. She had kissed him, touched him, laughed with him, and then sat across from me at dinner like nothing had happened. Like she was still the woman I married. I exhaled through my nose, steadying myself. Anger was there, of course. A slow, simmering kind of anger, the kind that didn't need to be loud to be dangerous. But I forced it down. This wasn't the time to let it control me. Instead, I focused on the other question that had been gnawing at the back of my mind. Who had sent me that message? Claire had clearly been careful. She hadn't left these messages out in the open, she had hidden them under an unsaved number, probably thinking it would be enough. But someone had known. Someone had seen through her lies. I grabbed my phone from the table and stared at the number again. It wasn't saved in my contacts. No name, no identifying details. Just the message. I decided to call it. The phone rang twice before someone picked up. Silence. Then a voice, quiet but firm. A young male voice. So you finally know. I recognized it immediately. I didn't know his name, but I had heard his voice before, maybe once or twice. He was one of Claire's students. He had been in the background of phone calls, one of the many nameless kids she had taught over the years. Who are you? My voice was level. A pause. Then. Someone who thought you should know. That's not an answer. A breath on the other end. A hesitation. And then, finally, my name is Jordan. The name meant nothing to me, but I didn't say that. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us, waiting for him to keep talking. He did. I sit next to him in class, Jordan said. I hear everything. He brags about it. Talks about how she texts him at night. How they meet up after school. How he's been to your house. I pressed my fingers into the table, gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white. How long? I asked. Months. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm. Why tell me? Jordan let out a slow breath. Because he thinks it's funny. Because he thinks you're stupid. He laughs about it with his friends. He says you'll never find out. I didn't realize I had clenched my jaw until my teeth started to ache. And you? Another pause. I just think it's messed up. I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. I ended the call and set the phone down. I had everything I needed. I waited. Claire took her time in the shower. She had no reason to rush. Why would she? She didn't know her secret was gone. She didn't know that the moment she walked downstairs, she would be stepping into the end of everything. When I finally heard her footsteps on the stairs, I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the screen, the messages still open. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. She walked into the kitchen, running a towel through her damp hair. She looked relaxed. Normal. She saw me sitting there and smiled. "What are you doing?" she asked. I didn't answer. I turned the laptop around so the screen was facing her. The moment she saw it, her entire body froze. The smile disappeared. Her fingers went stiff around the towel. Her breathing changed. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, she looked up at me. "Where did you find that?" She wasn't denying it. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even surprised. Something inside me twisted. "It doesn't matter," I said. My voice was calm. I sounded like I was talking about the weather. "How long has this been going on?" She opened her mouth, then closed it. I waited. Finally, she sighed and set the towel down. "A few months." That was it. No emotion. No regret. Just an answer. "Why?" Claire ran a hand through her hair, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. "I don't know." "You don't know?" I repeated. She exhaled, looking away. "It just happened." "It just happened," I said. I let the words sit there, hollow and meaningless. She was silent. I studied her face. The woman I had spent the last 10 years with. The woman I had shared everything with. The woman I had trusted. And I felt nothing. Not love. Not heartbreak. Just nothing. I stood up. She took a small step back. "Did you ever think I wouldn't find out?" I asked. She hesitated. "I didn't think about it," she admitted. I nodded slowly. "Right." She exhaled, rubbing her temples. "Look, Stop." She froze. I stared at her. "I don't want to hear your excuses," I said. "I don't care about your explanations. You knew what you were doing. You did it anyway." She blinked. "So what now?" Now. That was the question, wasn't it? I had already made my decision. But first, I wanted to see just how far she would go to justify this. "What were you going to do?" I asked. "Keep sneaking around? Keep lying to me?" Claire swallowed. "I was going to end it." I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "Sure you were," I said. "I mean it." I shook my head. "No, you don't. If you wanted to end it, you would have done it before I found out. You wouldn't have waited until you got caught." She didn't answer. I stepped closer. She didn't move away. She held my gaze, her face unreadable. She wasn't sorry. Not really. She was just trying to manage the damage. And that was the moment I knew there was no coming back from this. Everything between us was already gone. She had made her choice. Now it was my turn. I stepped past her, walking toward the door. "Where are you going?" she asked. I didn't look back. "To make sure you never forget this." And then I left. I sat in my car outside the house, staring at the steering wheel. My mind was calm, but my body wasn't. My hands felt too tight around the leather. My heartbeat was steady, but my jaw was clenched. The anger was still there, but I wasn't going to let it control me. Ryan Carter. That was his name. Jordan had given it to me without hesitation, but I had already decided that I wasn't going to waste time on him physically. Hurting him wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't erase what had already happened. I wasn't here for revenge in the way most men would think. I wanted something more permanent, something that wouldn't just make me feel better for a few minutes but would make sure Claire never forgot what she had done. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through the contact list until I found Jordan's number. I called him. Yeah? His voice came through after the first ring. I need more, I said. Jordan exhaled. More? Details, I said. What he said. Where they met. What he's told his friends. Everything. Jordan hesitated. I could hear it in his breath. You're not gonna do anything crazy, right? I didn't answer. Jordan sighed. He brags about it a lot. Says she's obsessed with him. Says she lets him take control, like she's the one trying to impress him. They meet after class, sometimes at her office, sometimes in her car. He talks about it like he's won some kind of prize. I gripped the phone tighter. Does he care about her? Jordan let out a short laugh. No. Not even a little. He talks about her like a joke. That was all I needed to hear. I ended the call and drove. Ryan's house was easy to find. A quiet, middle-class neighborhood. His car was in the driveway, parked at an angle like he hadn't bothered straightening it. The kind of arrogance you'd expect from someone who thought they were untouchable. I stepped out and walked to the door. I knocked twice. It took a few seconds before it opened. Ryan stood there, looking at me, confused. He was taller than I expected, lean but not intimidating. Just some arrogant teenager who thought he had played a game and won. He frowned. Yeah? I didn't introduce myself. I didn't need to. I just stared at him. And then I saw it, the moment of recognition. The way his eyes shifted, the way his expression changed. He knew who I was. I know, I said. He swallowed. His posture stiffened, but he didn't try to act tough. He didn't try to deny it. I don't want any trouble, man, he said. Then you shouldn't have slept with a married woman. He blinked. His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to come up with an excuse, but he didn't. You're going to do something for me, I said. You're going to call her. Ryan hesitated. Why? You're going to tell her it's over. His jaw tensed. He glanced inside the house like he was trying to decide if he could just slam the door on me. But he didn't. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His hands weren't steady. He put the phone on speaker. It rang twice before Claire answered. Hey, she said. Ryan exhaled. We need to stop. A pause. Then Claire's voice, slightly tense. What? Ryan swallowed. I can't do this anymore. Silence. Is someone there? Claire asked. Her voice had changed. Ryan glanced at me. I didn't say anything. I just watched. Claire spoke again. Ryan, is Ethan there? Ryan didn't answer. I reached out and took the phone from his hand. Yes, I said. Claire inhaled sharply. Ethan, I ended the call. Ryan stared at me. He didn't look cocky anymore. He just looked like someone who realized, too late, that he had made a mistake. Stay away from her, I said. You don't want to be in the middle of this. He nodded. He didn't argue. I walked away. As I got back in my car, I knew exactly what my next step was. Claire wasn't just going to lose me. She was going to lose everything. I drove back home without rushing. I had done what I needed to do. Ryan had made the call, Claire had heard my voice, and now she knew that everything was falling apart. I wasn't sure what kind of reaction she would have, but I knew she'd be waiting when I walked through the door. When I parked in the driveway, I saw the living room light on. Through the window, I could see Claire sitting on the couch, her elbows resting on her knees, hands clasped together. She wasn't looking at her phone. She wasn't pacing. She was just sitting there, waiting. I stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. I didn't hesitate before opening it. She looked up as I entered. Her eyes were red, but there were no tears on her face. She had cried already, but not in front of me. She had already broken down, already processed the weight of what had happened. I closed the door behind me and locked it. I wasn't leaving again. Not yet. Claire took a breath. Ethan. I didn't answer. I sat down in the armchair across from her. She exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against her legs. You don't need to explain, I said. My voice was steady. I don't want to hear it. She flinched slightly but didn't argue. We sat in silence for a few seconds. I watched her carefully. She was still wearing the sweater from earlier, still looking like the same woman I had known for years. But everything about her was different now. She shifted. What did you do? I leaned back. I made sure he understands that you're done. Her throat tightened. Did you hurt him? No. She searched my face, trying to read me. You made him call me, she said. It wasn't a question. She already knew. I nodded. She closed her eyes for a second, then looked down. You didn't have to do that. I tilted my head slightly. You really think that? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I let the silence stretch again. I wanted her to sit in it, to feel every second of it. Eventually, she exhaled. Are you going to leave me? I studied her face. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't begging. She was asking as if she had already prepared herself for the answer. I don't know yet, I said honestly. Her fingers curled slightly on her knees. What do you want from me? I let the question sit in the air. I wanted her to feel what I felt. The humiliation. The betrayal. The weight of knowing that someone you trusted had made a fool of you. I wanted her to understand, truly understand, what she had done. And she would. I took a breath. Give me your phone. Her body tensed slightly. Why? Because I said so. She hesitated for only a second before she reached over to the coffee table and picked it up. She handed it to me without a word. I unlocked it and scrolled through her messages. I went back through the conversation with Ryan, looking at every detail again. I wanted to be sure I hadn't missed anything. She shifted uncomfortably. Are you looking for something specific? I ignored her. The messages were exactly what I remembered. Flirty, reckless, proof that she hadn't even tried to hide it. But there was something else, something I had overlooked earlier. Another conversation. The contact name was Melissa. I clicked it open, IT was her best friend. Claire's body stiffened. The messages weren't about school. They weren't about weekend plans or casual gossip. They were about Ryan. Melissa knew everything. I scrolled through the messages, reading each one carefully. Claire, I don't know what I'm doing. Melissa, you're having fun. You deserve it. Claire, it's risky. Melissa, only if Ethan finds out. And he won't. I kept scrolling. Messages about their meetups. About the excuses Claire had made to keep me from asking questions. Melissa hadn't just known about the affair, she had encouraged it. I looked up at Claire. She knew. Claire swallowed. Ethan. She knew, and she didn't stop you. I set the phone down on the table. She helped you lie to me. She looked away. I exhaled slowly. I will not forgive you. Her head snapped up. What? You heard me. She shook her head slightly, as if she hadn't processed the words correctly. Ethan, You don't get to talk. My voice was sharp, final. You don't get to explain yourself. You don't get to justify anything. Her breathing became uneven. What are you going to do? I leaned forward. You're going to feel exactly what I feel right now. And when I'm done, you're going to wish I had just walked away. For the first time, real fear crossed her face. I stood up. Melissa's married, isn't she? Claire's face paled. Ethan. She is, I said. Good. I picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until I found Melissa's husband's number. I copied it to my own phone. Claire's voice wavered. Please. I looked at her. You weren't going to tell me, I said. You were going to keep this hidden for as long as you could. So don't sit there and ask me for anything. She swallowed hard. I walked toward the stairs. Where are you going? She asked quietly. To sleep, I said. You should, too. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. She didn't move. She just sat there, staring at me, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But I wouldn't. By the time this was over, she was going to regret every single choice she had made. The house was silent when I woke up. I lay there for a few seconds, staring at the ceiling, listening. No movement. No sound of Claire getting ready for work. No faint music playing from her phone. It was as if she had disappeared overnight. But I knew she was still here. She was waiting. I got up, got dressed, and walked downstairs. She was sitting in the same spot on the couch as last night. She hadn't changed clothes. She looked like she hadn't slept. She turned her head toward me as I entered the room, her eyes dull and unfocused. Did you call him? I walked past her to the kitchen and poured myself a cup of coffee. I didn't answer right away. I wanted her to sit in the uncertainty. I wanted her to feel what it was like to not know what was coming next. When I finally spoke, I kept my voice even. Not yet. She exhaled slowly, like she was trying to steady herself. What are you going to say to him? I sat down at the table and sipped my coffee. What do you think? She didn't answer. I leaned back in the chair, watching her. She was exhausted, but she wasn't breaking down. Not yet. She still thought she had control over something. That she could somehow minimize the damage. You haven't told anyone, have you? I asked. Her fingers tightened around the hem of her sweater. No. You didn't tell Melissa that I know? She shook her head. Good. I pulled out my phone and placed it on the table. You're going to call her husband? Claire's lips parted slightly. What? You're going to call him and tell him everything. Her hands gripped the fabric tighter. Ethan, please. I tilted my head. That's what you said to Ryan last night. Did you think begging was going to fix this? She swallowed. I'll tell him, but. No conditions, I cut in. No delaying it. No waiting for the right moment. You do it now, or I do it myself. She sat there, staring at the phone. I slid it across the table toward her. Call. Her breathing became uneven. She looked down at the phone, then at me, her expression unreadable. Do you really hate me this much? I let the question sit for a moment. Then I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. I don't hate you, Claire. My voice was calm. I want you to feel what I feel. That's not hate. That's balance. Her face twitched slightly, but she didn't cry. She picked up the phone with shaking hands and scrolled through her contacts. When she found his name, she hesitated. She looked up at me one last time, searching for some kind of mercy. She didn't find any. She pressed the call button. I watched her carefully. Every slight shift in her expression, every twitch in her fingers. The call rang twice before a man answered. His voice was groggy, like he had just woken up. Hello? Claire's throat tightened. Daniel. There was a pause. Claire? She swallowed. I need to tell you something. Another pause. What's wrong? She looked at me, silently begging for a way out. I gave her nothing. Her voice shook. I've been lying to you. Silence. Then, sharper this time, about what? She let out a slow, unsteady breath. About Melissa. I could hear the shift in his breathing. What do you mean? Claire closed her eyes. She knew about my affair. She encouraged it. She helped me hide it. Therefore, she can do something behind your back as well. Daniel was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. You're serious? Yes. Another pause. Then, why are you telling me this? Claire looked at me again, but I didn't say anything. Finally, she answered. Because Ethan knows. And he was going to tell you anyway. I could hear the sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Jesus Christ. Claire lowered the phone to her lap. The call was still active, but she didn't say anything else. I reached forward and took the phone from her hand. Daniel, I said. There was silence for a few seconds. Then, slowly, Ethan. She didn't tell you everything, I said. Claire's head snapped up, her expression panicked. Ethan. I ignored her. She didn't just cheat on me, I continued. She did it with a student. Daniel was silent again. Then, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, a student? I heard movement on his end. A chair scraping against the floor. A deep breath. Claire's hands were clenched into fists now, her entire body tense. Ethan, please don't. She betrayed me, I said, my voice calm and steady. Melissa helped her do it. And now you know, and you will expect everything from your wife. There was nothing else to say. I ended the call and set the phone back on the table. Claire sat there, staring at the blank screen. Her breathing was uneven, her fingers twitching slightly. You just ruined her life, she said quietly. I took another sip of my coffee. No. You did. She looked at me, and for the first time since this started, I saw something real in her expression. Not just fear. Not just guilt. It was something deeper. The full weight of everything settling on her shoulders. I leaned forward slightly. Do you feel it now? She didn't answer. I stood up and walked to the living room. I grabbed the envelope I had prepared the night before and placed it on the table in front of her. She stared at it, her body completely still. You already know what it is, I said. She nodded slowly. Sign it. Her lips trembled slightly. Are you really doing this? You ended this marriage the moment you decided I wasn't enough for you. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I pushed the envelope closer to her. Sign it. She reached for the pen with an unsteady hand. She hesitated for only a second before pressing it to the paper. She signed her name. I took the documents and stood up. Claire looked up at me. Her voice was quiet. Was I ever a good wife to you? I held her gaze. For a while, I said. But not anymore. She swallowed, nodding slightly. Do you think you'll ever forgive me? I considered the question for a moment. No. I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't need to pack anything. I had already decided last night I was leaving this house, and I wasn't coming back. I opened the door and stepped outside. Claire didn't follow me. She didn't call my name. She just let me go. I walked to my car and opened the door, but I didn't get in right away. I stood there for a moment, gripping the handle, letting everything settle. The cold air pressed against my skin, a contrast to the heat of the emotions I had been holding in. I had done what I needed to do. Claire had signed the papers. The truth was out. There was nothing left to say. I got in, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. I didn't need to see her one last time. She wasn't the same person to me anymore. She was someone I used to know, someone I had once loved but never could again. I didn't have a plan beyond this. I hadn't thought about where I was going. The house wasn't mine anymore, not in the way that mattered. I had walked out, and I wasn't coming back. There was nothing in that place for me except reminders of what had been ruined. I checked my phone at a red light. There were 2 missed calls from Claire, both from when I had been driving to Ryan's house the day before. She hadn't tried calling again since this morning. She knew there was no point. There was one message from Jordan. "Did you do it?" I didn't answer. I wasn't sure why he cared. Maybe it was guilt, maybe curiosity. Maybe he had been caught up in the mess just like me. But he had done his part, and I had done mine. There was nothing else between us. I kept driving. I didn't want to be in the city anymore. The streets were too familiar, filled with places where I had built a life with Claire. Restaurants we used to go to. Stores where we had picked out furniture together. Roads we had driven on, laughing about meaningless things. It all felt distant now, like memories that belonged to someone else. I pulled into a motel parking lot and turned off the engine. It was a cheap place, the kind of place people went when they needed somewhere to disappear for a while. I walked inside, paid for a room, and took the key without saying much. The clerk didn't ask questions. The room was small, with a bed that looked like it had been used too many times and a window that faced the highway. I sat down on the edge of the mattress and ran a hand through my hair. The exhaustion hit me all at once. Not just physical exhaustion, but the kind that settles into your bones, the kind that comes from knowing something is truly over. I leaned back against the wall and stared at the ceiling. I had imagined 1,000 different ways this could have ended, but I had never thought it would be like this. Quiet. Final. My phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "You did the right thing." I frowned. "Who is this?" I typed back. A few seconds later, the reply came. "Daniel." I exhaled. I had almost forgotten about Claire's friend's husband. He had been pulled into this just like I had. "How did it go?" I asked. There was a long pause before he answered. "Melissa denied it at first. Then she started crying. She admitted everything." I stared at the message. I could picture it so clearly. Melissa trying to talk her way out of it, realizing she couldn't, breaking down under the weight of her own lies. There was nothing else to say. We had both learned about the true nature of our wives in the same way. Maybe in another life, we would have been friends. But this wasn't the kind of connection that led to friendship. It was just 2 men who had been burned by the same fire. I put my phone down and closed my eyes for a moment. I had nothing left to do, nowhere to be. My entire life had been built around Claire, around our marriage, around the future I thought we were going to have. Now, all of that was gone. I opened my eyes again. I wasn't sad. I wasn't relieved. I was just empty. But that was okay. Because for the first time in a long time, I was free.